Yeah, she's having some
There is.
technical with the audio. But good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing great tonight. And we have with us Malu Sciamarelli. She has been working in the field of English language education in Brazil for over 20 years in many roles, including teacher, teacher trainer, materials designer, Cambridge English freelance speaker, and consultant. She's also an associate member of the Asian Teacher Writer Group and a committee member of the C Group, Creativity for Change in Language Education. She has published articles in several ELT journals, and her latest publication is a chapter in the British Council book, Creativity in the English Language Classroom. Currently, her main interests are literature, extensive reading, creative writing, and creativity in the English language classroom. So, Malu, we are very happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you all the PR team for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. And I hope you, after this webinar, you will be ready to use poetry in the classroom. I'm going to start sharing my slides. And then after I'm done, then you can ask any questions you like. I'm available for that. Okay? So let me just start. All right. Here are. Can you see well? Yes. Okay, so here we go. We can see that poetry is everywhere, across language and culture. Poetry is also timeless. Poems can tell stories or describe beautiful views. They connect us with the world around us through universal emotions like love, hate, grief, and wonder. So, there's no denying that poetry can be very powerful. Do you have an idea why it is absent from so many EFL classrooms? Um, I always think that students often balk at the idea of studying poetry in class. That's one of the reasons why it's absent from so many EFL classrooms. They believe that their language skills are an impediment to understanding poetry in the classroom. Very often, teachers also do not feel confidence in bringing poetry into the classroom. They believe that teaching a subject to EFL students that native speakers sometimes struggle to comprehend is a daunting task. However, from my point of view, I say that it can be done and there are lots of benefits for students and teachers alike. I'm going to start tell you first why I enjoy teaching poetry in the EFL classrooms. When I started teaching poetry, I discovered the joy of teaching it at the same time that I explore it with my learners. And my students, I can say that they have been very enthusiastic about our poetry classes. The first reason is the versatility. I can say that poetry is so versatile, which makes it a great form to use in the FL classroom. There are so many types of poetry and so many different forms of poetry, poems, that eventually each student is bound to find a poem that he or she will like. The second reason why I enjoy teaching poetry is because of the language, of course. Poems can be used to introduce or practice new vocabulary, language structures, and rhyming devices. And also, shorter poems often give students a chance to explore an idea while working with a more manageable amount of task or a short story or essay. The third reason is the culture. Did anybody know that today is the National Culture Day in Brazil? Well, this is one of the reasons why I like teaching poetry too. Poetry opens an interesting historical and cultural window from the epic poems of ancient civilizations to more modern political views poems written during the 20th century. And students may already be quite knowledgeable about the poets and poems that are an important part of their culture. Why not introduce them to other cultures as well? And finally, I think that's my favorite reason. It's the personalization. One of the things I like most about using poetry in the classroom is that I can usually create a lot of opportunities for personalization. This means that students have plenty to say and the communication is genuine because they are talking about their own experiences. They are engaged and motivated, which helps to make the lesson and the language, sometimes even the poem, memorable. So now, after exploring and telling you the reasons why I like to teach poetry in the classroom, let's talk about the benefits for teachers and students too. The first benefit that I see is that poetry offers wonderful opportunities for reading, writing, listening, and speaking practices. Poetry also gives students a chance to expand vocabulary knowledge, to play with the language, to work with different rhyme rhythms and rhyme patterns. To quote our poet Manuel Bandeira in Portuguese, and then I'll explain it better in English, Manuel Bandeira says that a poesia está nas palavras, se faz com palavras e não com ideias e sentimentos. Muito embora bem entendido seja pela força do sentimento e pela extensão do espírito que acodem ao poeta as combinações de palavras onde há carga de poesia. Which means we can convey feelings through words. That's why it's so important to learn and to know precise words, and is going to give them an expansion of the vocabulary. Also, Dr. Janet Hughes from the University of Ontario in Canada, she says that paying attention to vocabulary and rhythm develops orange language skills, and the development of orange language skills has a stronger correlation to proficiency in reading. And when you expand the vocabulary, you can play more with the language, you increase motivation. Yeah, so these are the benefits that I see when you are teaching poetry to students. And of course, the teacher is going to expand his or her vocabulary, play with the language, increase motivation in teaching too. So motivations can be expanded, the benefits can be expanded to both sides. However, one of the things that you may think, how do I get started teaching poetry in the EFL classroom? It's not a literature class. So there are some tips that I'm going to share now on how to get started. So it may be helpful to start the poetry class by finding out what kind of experiences your students have had with poetry. So I would suggest you to ask them first, do you know poems in your native language? If you're talking in the Brazil reality, do you know poems in Portuguese? Is there a particular poem from your country that you like? Who are the famous poems from your country? Have you written poems before? Was it in English or your native language? Did you enjoy writing poetry? And when I started asking these questions to my students, most of them say that they hated poetry because the experience in the Portuguese classes were awful, especially when the teacher asked them to write poetry. So it was a barrier that I had to overcome when I started teaching them. Some ideas for using poetry in reading classes. Yeah, so I start from reading classes because I think that that's the opening of the teaching poetry. And through reading, we can practice speaking and listening as well. Yes, and then I always say that poetry can range from simple and fun to complicated and abstract, which may be one of the reasons why it's so difficult for many teachers to start using poetry in the classroom. I would suggest you to start by choosing simple poems that are not too abstract or complex. Depending on the English level of the students, there are a variety of ways to start bringing poems, and I'm going to share them all now. I said, start with poems that are manageable. So make sure the poems you present first have simple and familiar language, images, and themes so they're accessible to your students. The second item is talk about the differences between stories and poems, because if they're not familiar with poems in English, it may be good to tell them the differences. But what I suggest you is to provide your students with a copy of a short story they have already read, yes, and a short poem of your choice. Then what I always do is to ask them to work in groups and make a list of the differences between the two pieces, noting characteristics such as length or the style of both texts. Have students, and then you have students share those differences with the class, because sometimes some groups find some characteristics and the others find others. So that's good to have them sharing as a group. The next one is giving students a chance to illustrate poems. I love doing that with students. Yes, what I always do, I have my students work in pairs to discuss and illustrate a short poem, or if it's a longer poem that I want to work with them, I select 1 or 2 lines. This will encourage them to think about the meaning and then express the interpretation in their own way. Then after that, you can ask students to share their illustration with the class so that everyone has a chance to think about the different meanings that their classmate have discovered. Because sometimes the pairs, they're going to have different interpretations, and that's okay. The other one is read a variety of poems out loud. Yes. What I always do is in the beginning of the classes, I read a poem to them. Yes, and I believe that reading a poem out loud brings it to life. Students will begin to understand and notice differences in rhythm, rhymes, feelings represented, as well as understand how the language creates an image or mood. But also, you have to give your students a chance to read poems out loud. Yes, and it will give them the chance to improve their confidence and orange language skill, as well as their reading fluency. But to increase their confidence and fluency, I have them choose a poem that they enjoy. I give them a selection of poems, yes, as again, bear in mind that the poems, they have to be manageable and short to start with. And then I give them a selection. The pairs, I put them in pairs, and then they select the poems that they would like to read, and then they practice reading out loud the poems to the pair, experimenting with expression, volume, and speed. After they have had some time to practice, you have to listen to them and offer them some feedback on expression and pronunciation. Once the students have more round of practice, ask them to share with the class. We always have great fun when we do that with my students. Another activity that I like doing a lot is act out the poem. Yes, so I select the class in groups, and for each group I give them a different poem. I give them some time to read the poem, to try to understand, and then rehearse. Yes, they have to rehearse their own interpretation, and then they present to the whole class. This activity is always great fun because they are very creative. If you give this chance to students to act out the poem, they are going to be very creative, and you can also record them, and you can sit together after as a group. Yes, the other one is discuss the vocabulary using different poems. Yes, as I said before, poems, they offer wonderful vocabulary related to a topic or an area that you may explore in the future, as well as a chance to think about the language. You can ask them, why did the poem choose a certain word? How does that word make you feel? What kind of sound does the word convey? Then after that, the students may want to pick a word or a phrase that's meaningful for them from a poem and write it on a poetic word wall. This is a sort of a graffiti wall of sentiments. I love doing that with students. The students, and then as you can put the poster, this poetic word wall in the class. And as you're working with poems throughout the course, they can continue to add to the wall as they discover new items, or even when they start writing their own poems. Because the next topic that I'm going to explore is how to write poems. And when they start writing their poems, they can choose the words or the phrases that they like the most and add to the poetic word wall. You have to encourage your students to share their personal interpretation. They will soon see that each reader finds a different meaning in the poem, and that's okay. Students shouldn't be looking for a right or wrong answer, especially in poetry. And be sure to include some poems written for children. Children's poetry can be so much fun, and it also gives students a chance to talk about important ideas and feelings. Even though you're not working with children, I encourage you to use these poems for children. They are going to enjoy it a lot. Okay, so these are my ideas how you can start introducing poetry in reading classes. Again, you don't have to work all through the class with poetry. You can start uh, we're using 5 or 10 minutes of your class to introduce and then move on to what you intend to use in the class. What I like the most though is to use poetry in writing classes. Yes, and then how you're going to introduce writing poetry in your classes. First, you have to read a variety of poems, and then you can explore those ideas of reading poetry in class. Yes, and I would suggest for you to work, if you're working on a semester base, you can select 1 month or 2 months to work with reading poetry, or if you are working on a year basis, you can work with 3, 4 months just reading. Don't explore writing first. That's my suggestion. And then you can move on to writing. While you are reading, you can introduce different poetry forms as models. Yes, I suggest you to read different poems that fit the structure or format. Then you can discuss unique rhyming or line patterns, and then have students try writing their own poems, using the poems read in the class as a model. Okay, so that's why it's a good idea to start with the reading class. Focus on each form before moving on to the next one so that students have a chance to explore it more. And what I always do, as I told you before, is to use poems throughout the syllabus. I know that we have sometimes a very strict syllabus. Time is a problem. Yes, but as I said, I suggest you to use 10 or 15 minutes of your classes to introduce poetry, and then you can select some classes where you're going to use the whole length of the class to use the poetry. So now I'm going to share some ideas and examples of writing poetry in the class. The first one with young learners. What I do is poems based on books. And this specific activity, I use the book Mr. Happy. As I don't know you're familiar with the Mr. books. So you have Mr. Happy, Mr. Sad, Mr. Miserable, and so on. There is a very extensive collection. So what I do with this? First, I choose a book. In this case, I chose Mr. Happy, and I read it for the children. Yes, I read out loud for them first. Yes. And then I ask them to draw what they most like about it. First, they draw, and then as they are drawing, I can read the story again. They can look at the book. They can discuss together. And in this picture of mine that you can see, that's a group of 5 girls. They were drawing, and then they have the book together with them. They look at the book, they were talking to me, and they're drawing what they most like about it. Then I ask them to write 4 lines to describe their drawing. Yes. And then here I have examples of what these little girls wrote. The first one, as you can see, Ana Luisa, she wrote, "The flowers of my garden shine brighter than the sun. Mr. Happy plays with us, and we have so much fun." So this is what she wrote about her drawing, and also from what one thing that's very important to say, there's no problem if you help them with the structure and with rhyming, because if they want to rhyme, sometimes you have to give them words. It's okay to do that as they are exploring language. The second one is Maria Fernanda. She wrote, "The sun is shining and I'm shining too. But why is Mr. Miserable so sad and blue?" Julia, she wrote, "On the other side of the world, the sun shines brighter than here. Mr. Happy and all his friends smile for everyone to see." And so that's another one based on Mr. Happy. The next one was Lorena. "If you are feeling blue, Mr. Happy's flowers will come to you and give you superpowers." So that's another image that she got from the book. And finally, Chiara, she wrote, "Mr. Happy and Mr. Miserable are laughing and laughing. They are only on the ground and everyone is coming round." So we're having so much fun. And after they wrote a poem, they act out their poems too, and also they read them out loud, and I recorded. Here later you can see in this video there is the YouTube here in the slides. I'm going to share the slides later, and then you can hear them reading their own poems. That's something that you can do with your students too. They love doing that. So that's one idea that you can do, and you integrate reading a book out loud with writing poems. The next one, again with young learners, all these activities that I'm doing with young learners, you can adapt with the teenagers and adults as well, as long as you choose other books, of course, but short books, yes, manageable at the first so that they can be read in the class. This activity that I selected too, the primary focus of this activity is to work with rhyme and writing, and the secondary is reading and listening. So what do you have to do? First, you choose a poem and read it out loud for the children. I chose Mr. Spider by Alan Mailey and showed the children a video in which Alan Mailey himself reads out loud. So I'm going to try to show you the video now. I don't know if it's going to work, and if it doesn't, I think that the team can help me too. Let's see. Okay, this is in my channel.
Climbing up the wall. Please don't, please don't, please don't fall. Are you so frightened? Why are you afraid? Because I think you'll poison the soup I've just made. Oh, Mr. Spider walking on the ceiling, you give my tummy such a funny feeling. What makes you so frightened? What makes you afraid? Because I think you'll drop on me and bite me till I'm dead. Please, little children, please don't run away. Please don't go. You really mustn't think that I am poisonous or mean. Remember that I eat the flies. Keep your house clean.
Okay. So let me just go back. Okay, so after showing this video, if you don't have a video, of course, you can read the poem of your. And then in this specific poem, I talk about where each line of the poem ends and how it creates rhyme poem and might even make the poem look a particular way. And then after discussing these things, I read it again as a group. Then I selected some words that rhyme. Yes, I read it again as a group and select some words that rhyme. In this case of this poem, I selected wall, fall, afraid, made, mean, clean, below, and go. And after selecting these words that rhyme, I help them write another poem. You can choose if you want to ask them to write individually, in pair, or as a group using these words. The day that I was using this activity with the children, with this particular group of children, there was a very funny story because there was really a spider on the wall and the girls were afraid. But after this poem, they started to talk to the spider and we wrote the poem together. Yes? And this is what we wrote. Seeing the spider climbing up the wall, my first thought was, it will fall. I was so afraid when I saw the web is just made. Then I shouted, spiders are so mean. But I saw how the room was clean. I sat with all the children down below and I said, little spider, please don't go. So we wrote this together as a group with the spider there with us on the wall. As a follow-up activity, you can ask them to read the poem out loud. In this case, we read it all together and then draw a picture of a spider. So this picture, one of the girls wrote in her iPad too. So this is another idea that you can use with young learners. The next idea, again with young learners, it's acrostic poem. So this can be used with very young learners and also older ones too. So what I did, I showed the child how to write an acrostic poem in which the first letter of each line spells out his or her name when read top to bottom. Yeah, so I work with their names first. Yes, once they write a poem based on their own name, they can go on writing about family members, friends, or pets. If they are too young, you can ask them to draw rather than write and read it out loud. So this is a very simple for them. So here I have an example. They are 6 years old and they cannot write yet. And as we were working with animals in these lessons, they drew themselves. So you can see him, Henrique and Caio, and beginning with each letter of their names, they drew the animals. And then I wrote what they said as they reported to me their poems. They simply drew and they said this. Henrique said, horses are strong and elephants too. My nose moves like rabbit's noses when insects bite it. Quack, a duck said when he saw an umbrella protecting an egg from the rain. Well, you see, these are meaningful for them. Yeah, so that's what's important. With the time, they're going to write more complex ones. Caio, he reported to me, and then I wrote it. Kangaroos live in Australia. Alligators like dirty rivers. Insects are everywhere, and octopuses live in the sea. So that was their first poems that they wrote when they were 6 years old. So that's something that you can explore with young learners too. Okay, so let's now, I share these three ideas that you can use with young learners, maybe adapt with young, older students, to share ideas that you can work with all other students, from teenagers to adults. Yes, the first one, my first example, is haiku poems. Yes, and most of the students, they have never heard about haiku. So I started the class with a haiku hangman, as you can see here in the image. And once they discover what the word is, they have no idea what it is, of course, but I don't explain. Yes. So I don't explain what a haiku is. I simply give them a definition of what poetry is. Yeah, so I use this definition in this class. Poetry is an art form in which human language is used for its aesthetic qualities in addition to, or instead of, its notional and semantical content. It consists largely of oral and literary works in which language is used in a manner that is felt by its user and audience to differ from ordinary prose. And I don't explain again what a haiku is. Then I ask them the following questions. Do you like poetry? If you do, which poems do you read and why? Yes, and then I have them discuss. Have you ever written poetry? If so, do you show it to other people? Why or why not? Because I had some, they write poems, but they don't show to anyone. Have you ever read or written a haiku? And again, when I work with this group, and I work with 3 groups of haikus, and they said they have never read or even heard of what a haiku is. And if they do, you can ask them where did the haiku originate, and if there are any rules for writing haikus. Yes. I talk about, let me just go back. I talk about the questions 1, 2, and 3, 4 maybe, as if they know what a haiku is, but I don't give them the answer to the last one. What I simply do is that I show some haikus and we're going to find out what they are together. I wrote these haikus to use in the class, and here they are. I hate my alarm. It always wakes me early when dreams are still there. Today beauty fades, leaving only dead flowers withering away. Clouds dance in the sky, pure white cotton on blue hides, unveiling sunrise. And I love my kitten. She's always in the kitchen, purring all around. Yeah, so I read these poems to them, these haikus, and then I share these tips for writing haikus. The haiku has a total of, so they have to complete it. I don't give them the answer. Line 1 and line 3 should have how many syllables? Line 2 should have a number of syllables again. And then you can write about experiencing life through your 5. And then after reading these haikus, we can work this together. A haiku has a total of 3 lines. They can see it here. And I count the lines with them, again based on the rhythm of the poem. Yes, has 5 syllables. They work it out together. Line 2 should have 7 syllables, and you can write about experiences life through your 5 senses. Yes, and you can write about anything. That's why I gave them these 4 examples with very different topics. After reading the simple poems, I asked them to and with the tips for writing haikus, they're going to start experiencing writing their first haiku. So to do so, I showed them the picture, this picture here. I took this picture 2 years ago in Japan. And then I also write on the board the word love. I asked them to discuss in pairs what can they feel, what they feel when they see this picture, and also together with the word love. Then they can discuss, they can talk. I give them some time, and then they can write their first haiku together. Of course, they're going to write individually, but with the pair discussing how to work with line 1 and 3 that have 5 syllables, and then line 2 that has 7 syllables. And at this moment, if any help is needed, there is no problem in giving them some words or even a line as they are experiencing. So I have here some examples. Let's see if I'll be able to read them all. This is a group of teenagers, and they are about 15, 16, and 17 years old. So Julia, she wrote, "The flowers are so beautiful, so much peace and love, togetherness." Gabriel Giro wrote, "The flowers are so graceful, they made me feel so relaxed and in peace." Mateus wrote, "Peace and calmness, so beautiful and colorful, just like a rainbow." And 2 more examples from Pedro Giraldi. "White flowers are so grateful, and with those green leaves, peace all around us." And Nicole wrote, "Spring is so peaceful in Japan or anywhere. Nature always there." You see, they were very beautiful and simple to do as their first haiku. The next example is creating a found poem. Do you know what a found poem is? So they didn't know either. And then I explained that a found poetry is a type of poetry created by taking words, phrases, or sometimes the whole sentences from other sources and reframing them in a creative and original way, thus imparting new meaning. So you can take these words, phrases, and sentences from texts, books, advertising, anything that's around you. But I started this first activity with songs. Yes. So what I did, I asked them first. The idea is to work with the poems from 10 to 12 lines. So if you have a group with 10 to 12 students, you can ask them to name their favorite song individually. If you have more, sometimes it happens, you can group them in pairs or even groups to have up to 10 to 12 groups again. One very important thing is to listen to the song before the next classes to make sure they're appropriate, and select one for each group or student. So that means if you have 12 students, you are going to select 12 songs, but you have to listen to the songs first. So you're not going to work with it in one class, but 2. Yes. In the next class, I give students sheets of paper with the 5th line of each song written on them. So you have to listen to the first song and to the lyrics, write the fifth line of each song in strips of paper and give to all the students, or all the group. You play all the songs up to the fifth line, and as they listen to the songs, they have to identify the lines. You can play each song up to the fifth line twice. So this is a listening exercise too. And then you can have the students compare their answers. They have to identify the line and compare the answers. Okay. Each student or group must have the sentence for each song. For instance, as I said before, if you have a group of 10 students and you played 10 songs, each student must have 10 slips of paper with a sentence from the song written on them. Okay? So if you have a class of 10 students, you played 10 songs, each one of them must have 10 slips of paper. When all the sentences are identified, you can ask them to arrange them in any order they wish to make a poem. So make sure they have different orders. So you have 10 different poems. You can ask them to read each of the poems out loud and discuss their meaning in their own view. But before that, if it's necessary, you can ask them to add, you can help them by adding linkers or some words sometimes to make sense. Yeah, so I have here an example with the 12 lines. Yes. So here that what one of the students created. Open your eyes. Life's what happens when you're busy making other plans. Whenever I'm alone with you, I go to the other side of paradise. It will be just a perfect day, and if thou should ask my love, I'll love you more with every breath, and build a ladder to the stars. Do you dream to touch me and smile down deep inside? Oh, God help the beast in me. I knew I'd lose you. You've got to learn also it's very hard. And these are the songs that were used in this activity. I did this first activity online, so one person, instead of writing the fifth line of the poem, she wrote one of the lines based on Jamie Come to Me by Robert Burns. But that's okay. You can work only with songs, and this is what you have. That's very creative, and you can have lots of fun with the poems too. Okay. The next activity that I would like to share with you is with cinquain poems. Yes. First, I start the activity explaining what a cinquain poem is. Yes. A cinquain poem is a classic form of poetry that employs 5 lines. Yes. And there are very different forms of writing in cinquain. I use this specific form here. The first line is one word title, the subject of the poem. The second line is a pair of adjectives describing the title. The third line is a 3-word phrase that gives more information about the subject. The fourth line consists of 4 words describing feelings related to the subject. The fifth line is a single word synonym or other reference for the subject from line 1. So I started with a very simple activity called Getting to Know You with cinquains. What they have to do is to interview a classmate and use what they learn to write a cinquain about that person. So the first question they have to ask is, what is your name? So they're going to write the person's name using 1 word. The second, what are some adjectives that describe you? 2 adjectives describing the person. In the third line, they have to ask, what are some activities you enjoy? And in the case of these activities, I ask them to write ing action words. The fourth line is the question, what do you think makes you a good friend to others? That's a 4-word phrase about friendship. And the last one, do you have a nickname? So again, it's a 1-word nickname. And this is what we have in this class. After they have the interview, of course, you can give them some time so that they can talk a little bit more. Pedro Giraldi wrote, Luis, intelligent, nonsense, studying, cooking, reading, really funny with friends, Lippi. Nicole wrote, Julia, happy, outgoing, reading, sleeping, cooking. Someone that's trustworthy. Ju. And Julia wrote, Nicole, happy, shy, swimming, reading, eating. Someone that's caring. Nick. And then I have some other examples here that you can read later on. There are lots of examples that I shared here. They had lots of fun when they did it. Yes, and so their first Cinquain poems. And finally, the acrostic poems. Yes, so what I do with this activity here, the acrostic poems. I start with this activity called Name the Poem. So what I do first, I distribute first, I prepared some cards with haikus, some cards with acrostic poems, and some cards with Cinquain poems. As I worked with haikus and Cinquain poems before, they are more familiar with these two types of poetry. So each of the group, they have to read, they receive one card of a haiku, one card of a Cinquain, and one card of acrostic poem, and they have to identify the poems first. And so that's a good activity for reading. And I also ask them to read out loud with their group. Yes. Um, so they ask them to describe. I ask them to describe the haiku and CK poems and explain what an acrostic poem is. My students, they were familiar with the haiku and the CK poems, but not with acrostic. So from what they could read there, they can come up with the definition for a CK. Yes, for acrostic, sorry. And then from here, you can work with any kind of subject that you'd like. This activity can be used to introduce a topic too. So that's a good idea to use in the first 10 or 15 minutes of your class. Yes, in this case, I was working with fairy tales with my students. And so I asked them to retell briefly some of the fairy tales they are familiar with. And after they described lots of fairy tales, very common fairy tales, and what they know about, they're very well known. I read a fairy tale of my choice, different from what they know, completely different. And to do so, I used the book Gossip from the Forest by Sarah Maitland, and I chose the fairy tale The Dreams of Sleeping Beauty. If you have opportunity to read this book, is amazing. And in these fairy tales, The Dream of a Sleeping Beauty, there are 100 dreams. So we read this dream together, Sleeping Beauty dreams, and we also discuss about what they mean. And after that, I asked them to write an acrostic poem using the words fairy tales. Right? And so here I have 3 examples. Mateus Durante, he wrote, first, you need to dream. After that, you must feel. Imagine that fantasy is real. Reality gets so boring when you learn that what isn't real tastes better just for a few. All you got is nothing. Life has sent you no mail that day. Everything is not real, so live in a fairy tale. So that was what he felt after everything we discussed. Gabriel Delgado, he wrote, you see how the characteristic of each one is different, and that's okay. As for you, a fairy tale in your life resounds your way to analyze the world, less disturbed. But in the end, this is how it is supposed to be. And Leonardo Puccini, he wrote, falling down the rabbit hole, Alice was feeling sick. Illness took her everything, reducing her to absolutely nothing. Yelling in pain, tearing her thoughts apart, Alice could not feel anything. Looking for help, she shouted, noticing that she had no voice at all. Suddenly, waking from a nightmare, she felt hungry and ate the magic cake. See, so there are different ideas, fairy tales, and from what we discussed before. So these were the activities that we like and explore poetry in a fun way in the language class. After each class, I also ask my students what are the benefits of using poetry in the class, because I like them to reflect on what they're doing, not just to do something because I told them so. So all of them, they reported after that vocabulary improvement, because they were working with words that they didn't know before, and they were having lots of fun with that. They also, that was a surprise for me too, better intonation, pronunciation of words in general, because sometimes to rehearse a poems, they have to repeat, listening to their partners reading too, asking for help. That was interesting too. They told me that when they were reading poems and doing the activities and thinking of what to write, they were thinking directly in English without any kind of translation. Yes, and that's a wonderful too. They say the close observation, because they have to use precise words. Yes. Clear thinking, they could think more clearly, and limiting themselves to the essential. And that's why it was important, this expansion of vocabulary. Yes. And I believe that you cannot fake enthusiasm and motivation, but they can rub up on the most skeptical of students. And after working with some poetry class, they started to ask for more and more. And that's, for me, that was the greatest reward of all, to work with them. Yes. I just wanted to, before we go to the questions, if you have any. Yes, and the poem, we don't know the author. The author is a no, and the name is You Never Know. Someone may catch a dream for you. You never know when a little word or something you might do may open up the window of a mind that seeks the light. The way you live may not matter at all, but you never know. It might. And just in case it could be that another's life through you might possibly change for the better, with a broader and brighter view, it seems it might be worth a try at pointing the way to what's right. Of course, it might not matter at all, but then again, it might. Thank you very much. And you can see here my email if you have any questions or if you'd like to share anything after this webinar. My website, you can have some ideas there. All these activities are described there. So you can go on the blog, and also the C group, that's the Creativity for Change in Language Education. If you want to know more about it, you can read on this website and ask something after that. Okay, so I'm here now. If you want to ask me some questions. Yes, so let me just go back. Okay, here I am. Yes, here I am again.
Well, that was great.
Yeah.
So now we could see if there's any question from anyone, or if you want to just ask your question, you can unmute your microphone.
Hi, there is a question from YouTube from Fabiano Almeida. He asked you, Malu, about one-to-one lessons, if you have any suggestions of things that we could do with one-to-one.
Well, you can do the same. All these activities can be done one-to-one. Yes, there are two with Cinquain poems. Yes, I work with two individual students. They are adults, and they are one-to-one. So you can do the same. The only thing that's different is that you, as a teacher, you are going to have conversation. You have to practice reading out loud with them. But you can use the same lesson plan for one-to-one students too. Yes.
Great, awesome. And have you ever had any student in particular who was really resistant at first? I know you mentioned the teenagers, that they said that they hated poems, but have you had someone that was really resistant and reluctant to work with poems, even
Yes,
after a
this,
while?
yes, when I started reading, they thought it was okay to read because I was introducing a topic to what I was going to work after that. And then when I started introducing writing poetry into the classroom, they were very resistant at first because they had very bad experiences with their Portuguese teacher. the Portuguese language teacher in their school. And they reported, this group in particular that I share most of the examples, they told me that the Portuguese teacher read sonnets and asked them to write sonnets out of the blue, simply read and write a sonnet. Yes, and then I said, we are going to do something different. You are not going to write first. And so I guided them throughout the activities. And then when they felt more comfortable, they were having fun. And in the end, they wrote the poems without noticing they were writing. And when they saw that they could do it, they were very enthusiastic about it. And then in the other classes, it was easier to start writing poetry again. And as I said, now they're asking me to write poems. And they say, when are we going to write poems again?
That's awesome.
Malu, I have a question.
Yes.
These kinds of you do as a project, or it is gonna be presented to the parents? What do you do during the classes? What's that?
No, as I said, all this work with poetry is extra. Yes, because it's not in the syllabus, and we have a very strict syllabus and time too. So I use all these activities, reading activities, to introduce other topics, and then writing to practice extra writing. So these are extra classes. Yes. With most of the students, I record videos, and I post on YouTube in my channel, and then I share with the parents and with the school too. Yes, but it's not any specific project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as you mentioned, Malu, your YouTube channel, I really recommend people to go and pay a visit to your channel because there are some very inspirational projects there. There is the tree project. I think that's the most recent one. You uploaded, I
Yes,
think,
yes.
a day ago.
Yeah. And there's a new one I uploaded today too. I'm working with this project with young learners. And after I completed this project, they're going to write a poem too. So this is something I'm working on at the moment. Mm.
And
And there
there are
are
also some,
also,
sorry.
no, it's okay. Thank you. I was going to say that there are not only students, but some professionals in the area also that I invite to participate in the creativity channel. That's my channel on YouTube. And I invite you all, if you have something to share, that will be a pleasure to have you
Oh,
there
very
too.
nice.
Thank you, lovely. I'm sure after this session, a lot of teachers will feel inspired to try and work with poetry in their classes, in their lessons, and they'll have something to share with you. And could you tell me a little bit more about the C group?
The C group, it's the creativity group. That's creativity for language change, for creativity for changing language education. So the main objective of the C group is to promote more creativity in the classroom, as and not to be confined in the syllabus and what we have to do. And so it's a group that's open to everybody can join. If you'd like all to join, you just have to send me an email. And so it's a group where people that have like-minded ideas and use creativity in your own way in the class can join, share your ideas, and to promote creativity in other fields too of education, other fields of education too. Mm.
So, Malu, I do have a question for you. I was wondering if you teach adults as well, and if you try this kind of project with them.
Yes, I have tried the thinking poem with one of them, with a group, with two groups actually, with one-to-one student and with the two groups of adults. And then first I used this interview, Getting to Know You with thinking poems. And then we work with listening and video. And I selected a topic from the book that we were using. So there was a topic from the universe. So we work with uh, the text that was written in the book, and after discussing, we wrote the Cinquain poems based on the lesson and also on the getting to know you with Cinquain poems. And so they had lots of fun because we were using the book. And in the end, they worked with the Cinquain poems and they could write about what they learned.
Oh,
So, and one of the groups, they said, we cannot write anything, especially poetry. And they were so happy when they could. The first thing that they did was to share on Facebook with all their friends. I'm a poet now.
and do you think that kids or teenagers behave differently from adults? I mean, is there any group that is a little bit more reluctant than the other?
Oh, the teenagers, yes, definitely. The young learners, they are open to everything that you want to do with them. They are fantastic. They have lots of fun with everything. The teenagers, they are more reluctant. So sometimes I think that's a good idea to start working with something that's meaningful for them. So I start working with creating a fun poem with songs they like, so they have fun with what they're doing, and then you can develop to the other kind of poems. Yes, at the moment I'm working with sounds. Yes, so I'm using lots of music and different sounds to work with poems and other kinds of writing, but this is a project that I'm going to share next year.
Oh,
And so they are very enthusiastic about it and very motivated too. Yeah, but that's for next year.
great. Thank you, Molly. That was really awesome. We enjoyed a lot having you here on
Thank
another Growth webinar, and it was an honor for us to have you.
Well, it was an honor for me to be here with you. Thank you very much. Yes, and if you have any other questions, I am available on the Gmail. Please.
Right. So,
Thank you.
everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know how hard it is on a Thursday, so late. Thank you so much, Malu, once again. That was a pleasure having you, and we surely
Pleasure. Thank you.
learned a lot from you, especially because I know many people, most of the people are not as familiar as you are with poetry, and that was just awesome that you could share that with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here with you all. Yes, thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming, and we would like to tell you that on December 10th we're going to have another webinar with James Taylor talking about what is overrated and underrated in ELT. James is going to talk about the trends and things that sometimes we don't pay so much attention to in ELT, and it's going to be really thought-provoking, so I hope to see you all there.
See you.
Yes.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye
Have a good night.
bye.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Thank you, Malu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye
Bye
See
bye.
you.
bye.
Good night.
Good night.